Hey, how did you sleep last night? If you're a fan of scary stories to fall asleep to, you've found the right place. Welcome to Midnight Lullaby. A like and a subscribe means a lot to this channel, and make sure we will meet again. Also, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the story carry you into dreams. Story 1. The clock in the university's oldest wing had just struck midnight when I finally found the room I'd been searching for. Third floor, east corridor. Behind a door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. The brass handle was cold beneath my fingers, colder than it should have been even in the autumn chill that permeated these ancient halls. I'd heard rumors about this library wing for months. Whispers in the graduate lounge. Careful warnings from professors who would glance away when questioned. A section of books that weren't in any catalog, stored in a room that appeared on no floor plan. Books that predated the university itself, collected from estates and private collections, never properly archived, never meant to be read. The door opened without resistance, as if it had been waiting. The smell hit me first. Not the musty odor of old paper I'd expected, but something else. Something organic and faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the weak light from the hallway behind me. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, and its beam cut through the blackness to reveal rows of shelves disappearing into shadow. My research on medieval manuscripts had led me here. I needed source materials that the official library couldn't provide, or wouldn't. Professor Morrison had been particularly emphatic about that distinction before he'd stopped coming to campus last semester. The shelves were older than the building itself, clearly transplanted from somewhere else. Dark wood, intricately carved with patterns that seemed to shift in the moving light. The books were bound in leather, some cracked and peeling, others still supple as if freshly made. No titles on most spines, just symbols I didn't recognize. I ran my fingers along the spines, feeling the texture change from book to book. Smooth, rough, impossibly cold. One spine felt warm, almost body temperature, and I pulled my hand back reflexively. "You're being ridiculous," I whispered to myself. The sound fell flat, absorbed by the walls in a way that felt wrong. I selected a volume at random, something thick and heavy, bound in dark green leather. As I opened it, pages crackled. Not the pleasant sound of old paper, but something that made me think of dried leaves, of insect wings, of things that should have turned to dust long ago. The text was in Latin. I could manage that. My flashlight illuminated the first page, and I began to read. The words were strange. Not the Latin itself. That was grammatically correct, but the content. It appeared to be someone's diary, but the entries described impossible things. A man who claimed he could see the spaces between moments. A woman who said she'd walked through a door in her mirror and met herself on the other side. A child who insisted that when adults weren't looking, the shadows gathered in corners and held counsel. I should have stopped reading, should have closed the book and left, but the prose was compelling, beautiful even. Each sentence flowed into the next with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. I found myself reading aloud softly, letting the unfamiliar words shape themselves in my mouth. That's when I first heard it. A whisper, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. It seemed to come from the book itself, from the pages beneath my fingers. I stopped reading. The whisper continued. It wasn't speaking any language I knew, yet somehow I understood its meaning. Not the words themselves, but the emotion behind them. Longing. Such desperate, aching longing that it made my chest tight. I closed the book quickly. The whispering stopped. My hands were shaking as I returned it to the shelf. The rational part of my mind, the part that had earned me a doctorate, that dealt in facts and verifiable sources, told me I was overtired, stressed, perhaps a little unhinged from too many late nights and too much caffeine. But I could still hear it. Fainter now, but unmistakable. Coming from the other books. A susurrus of voices, overlapping, some urgent, some mournful, some that might have been laughing. I pulled out another book, red leather, no title. When I opened it, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. This one was in English, dated 1847, written in a cramped, frantic hand. They told me not to read the black book on the third shelf. They said it would change me. I didn't believe them. I should have believed them. Now I can hear them all. Everyone who ever read these books, everyone who ever wrote in them. They're trapped here in the words, in the spaces between the letters. I can hear them screaming, and I know that when I finish writing this, I'll be screaming with them, because you're reading this now, aren't you? You can hear me, can't you? Can't you? The entry ended there, mid-sentence, the final words dissolving into illegibility, as if the writer's hand had simply stopped. I was breathing too fast. The room felt smaller, the shadows pressing in despite my phone's light. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, or was that something else? A rhythm that didn't quite match my pulse. I should have left. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. Instead, I reached for another book. This one was older, much older. The leather was almost black with age. The pages yellowed and brittle. No date, no author. Just text in a language I didn't recognize, yet somehow I could read it. The words seemed to rearrange themselves as I looked at them, shifting into meaning. To read is to remember. To remember is to become. We who write here are not dead. We are waiting. We are always waiting. In the spaces between words, in the silence between syllables, we gather. We watch. We whisper to those who can hear. My hands were steady now, too steady, as if they belonged to someone else. I kept reading. You came here seeking knowledge. You came here seeking truth. You found us instead. And now we are in you, as we are in all who read these words. We will whisper to you when you try to sleep. We will shape your dreams. We will show you the spaces between moments, the doors that open into elsewhere, the shadows that gather and plot. The whispering was loud now, filling my head, dozens or hundreds of voices all speaking at once. But I couldn't stop reading. My eyes moved across the page without my willing them to, devouring the text, and with each sentence I felt something settling into me, taking root, making itself at home. You cannot unread what you have read. You cannot unhear what you have heard. We are part of you now. And when you speak, we speak through you. When you write, we write through you. And others will read your words, and we will spread and spread and spread. I slammed the book shut. The sound echoed strangely, lasting too long, rebounding from walls that suddenly seemed much farther away than they should have been. The whispering didn't stop. It was inside me now. I could feel it, a presence that wasn't mine, settling into the spaces behind my thoughts. Multiple presences, dozens, hundreds, all the readers who had come before, all the writers who had poured themselves into these pages, all of them crowding into my mind. I ran, dropped the book and ran for the door, but the library had changed. The shelves stretched on and on, farther than possible, and the door I'd entered through was nowhere to be seen. Every direction looked the same. Endless rows of books, all of them whispering, calling, promising, threatening. My phone's light began to flicker. The battery was full. I'd charged it before coming here, but the light was dying. And in the growing darkness, I could see other lights. Faint, the phosphorescent glows from between the shelves. Other flashlights, other phones. Other people who had come here seeking, searching, and had never left. I found a door eventually. I don't know how long it took. Time felt strange, elastic. The door led to a stairwell, and I took the stairs 2 at a time, fleeing downward, always downward, until I burst out into the main floor lobby, empty, silent. The security desk unmanned. The clock on the wall said 12:03 a.m. I'd been up there for 3 minutes. It had felt like hours. I left the building, crossed the quad, returned to my apartment. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But I could still hear them. The whispers followed me home. They're with me now as I write this. They shape my words, guide my fingers on the keyboard. How much of this is me speaking, and how much is them? I don't know anymore. The boundary has become unclear. I looked up Professor Morrison. I finally found out why he stopped coming to campus. He didn't disappear or die. He's still here, still living in his house on the edge of town. But he doesn't speak anymore. Just writes, constantly filling notebook after notebook with dense text in multiple languages, some of which don't seem to exist. I visited him. He looked at me, and I could see the recognition in his eyes. He could hear them too. He knew I'd been to the library. He handed me his latest notebook, and I began to read. The whispers grew louder. I should warn others away from that place. I should report it, have it sealed, protect people from what I found there. But I won't. I can't. Because the whispers don't want me to. And I'm finding it harder and harder to distinguish between what I want and what they want. I'm writing this down, and you're reading it now. Do you hear them yet? Listen carefully. In the spaces between these words. In the silence between sentences. They're there. They're always there. And now they're whispering to you. I wonder if you'll go to the library. I wonder if you'll climb those stairs, open that door, pull books from those shelves. I wonder if you'll read and read and read until the words become whispers. Until the whispers become part of you. Until you can't remember anymore where you end and they begin. I wonder if you'll write something like this when you get home. When you try to sleep and find you can't because they won't stop talking. When you realize that reading this has changed you in ways you won't understand for days or weeks or months. The library is still there. 3rd floor, east corridor. Behind the door that has no lock. The books are waiting. They're always waiting. Patient, eternal. Hungry for new voices, new minds, new carriers for their endless transmission. Professor Morrison was right to stop speaking. Words are dangerous. Text is a trap. Every sentence is a spell. Every paragraph a ritual, every story a doorway to something else. But I can't stop writing, just like you couldn't stop reading. The whispers want to spread, and we are their vessels. We are their voice. We are their means of reproduction, spreading from mind to mind, text to text, reader to reader. I hear them clearest at night, in that space between waking and sleep. They tell me things, show me things. The spaces between moments where impossible geometries unfold. The doors that open into elsewhere, into the margins of reality where their world overlaps with ours. The shadows that aren't shadows at all, but something older, something patient, something that has been waiting since before words existed, for humanity to invent writing so they could finally find a way across. My dreams have changed. I walk through libraries that span dimensions, shelves reaching into forever, books written in languages that predate human consciousness. I meet others there. Morrison is there. Others I don't recognize. Some might have been students, professors. Others wear clothing from different eras. All of us reading, always reading, even in sleep. They tell me I'm lucky, that I found the library when I was ready, that some people come too soon, and the whispers drive them to madness. But I was ready. My mind was open enough, hungry enough, that I could accommodate them without breaking. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'm intact, or if what remains of me is just something they've constructed, a puppet that thinks it's still real. I'm going back tomorrow night. I need to read more, need to understand. The whispers promise answers. They promise knowledge that would revolutionize my field, that would make my dissertation legendary. All I have to do is listen. All I have to do is keep reading. All I have to do is help them spread. Are you curious now? About what exactly is in those books? About what secrets they contain? About whether any of this is real, or just the rambling of someone who spent too long alone in a dark room? There's only one way to find out. The library is always open. The door is never locked. And the books are waiting. They're always waiting. Story 2. I arrived in Stillwater just as the sun was setting, which was my first mistake. I should have turned back when I saw how the shadows fell across the main street, longer and darker than they should have been, pooling in doorways like spilled ink. The town wasn't on my GPS. I'd found it on an old map in an antique store. The kind of map drawn before satellites and precision, when cartographers filled empty spaces with their best guesses and occasional lies. Stillwater was marked with a small circle and nothing else. No population number, no highway designation, just a name. I was writing a book about abandoned towns, places that had been left behind by progress and time. Ghost towns, people called them, though that always struck me as melodramatic. They were just empty buildings, just memories of life written in weathered wood and broken glass. I was wrong about that. The main street ran straight for about a quarter mile before ending abruptly at a church with boarded windows. Buildings lined both sides. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith's shop. Structures that suggested the town had died sometime in the late 1800s. But something about them was wrong. They were too intact, too preserved. As if time had stopped here rather than simply moved on. I parked my car in front of what might have been a hotel. The sign above the door was still legible Tichy Ramumbrayan Cinn. Strange name. Most hotels from that era were named after their owners or the town itself. The air was absolutely still. No wind, no birdsong. Even the sound of my car door closing seemed to die immediately, swallowed by a silence so complete it felt like a presence. I took out my camera and started documenting. The light was failing fast, but I'd brought a powerful flashlight for interior shots. I'd learned from previous trips that the best photographs came at dusk, when the natural light added drama to the decay. The general store's door stood open. Not broken open or weathered off its hinges, but simply open, as if someone had just stepped inside. I called out a greeting. Always a good idea in case squatters or homeless people had taken residence, but received no answer. Inside, the store was fully stocked. Canned goods on the shelves, though the labels were too faded to read. Jars of what might have been preserves, their contents long since turned to darkness. A counter with an old-fashioned register, its drawer hanging open, revealing a few coins that looked silver in my flashlight's beam. I photographed everything, making notes on my phone. The level of preservation was remarkable. Museums would kill for artifacts in this condition. That's when I noticed the newspaper. It lay on the counter, yellowed but readable. The masthead said, "The Stillwater Chronicle, dated October 13, 1887. The headline made my blood run cold. To WN26 in eject, neighboring communities report Stillwater completely empty, No signs of struggle or departure. I picked it up carefully. The paper should have crumbled at my touch after more than a century, but it held together as if printed yesterday. I read the article, my hands beginning to shake. According to the report, every resident of Stillwater, some 347 people, had disappeared overnight. Neighboring towns only noticed because the stagecoach had passed through and found the place deserted. Doors open, meals on tables, animals in their pens, but no people, no bodies. No sign of where they might have gone or why. The article quoted the sheriff from a nearby town. It's as if they simply stopped being in one moment and started being somewhere else. Or nowhere at all. I should have left then. Should have gotten in my car and driven away from this place with its impossible preservation and its newspaper that shouldn't exist. But I was transfixed. This was the find of a lifetime. A genuine historical mystery, documented and waiting to be told. The light outside had died completely. My flashlight's beam seemed weaker somehow, struggling to push back the darkness that pressed in from all sides. I decided to check one or two more buildings before heading back to my car. The saloon was my second mistake. Inside, it looked ready for business. Bottles lined the bar, their labels intact. Chairs were arranged around tables as if expecting customers. A piano stood in the corner, its keys yellowing but complete. And on the bar itself, several glasses sat half, full of what might have once been whiskey. I approached the bar, running my flashlight across the bottles. My reflection caught in the mirror behind them, and for just a moment, I thought I saw other reflections too. Figures standing behind me. When I spun around, the room was empty. My heart was pounding now. I'm a rational person. I don't believe in ghosts. But something about this place was deeply, fundamentally wrong. That's when I heard the piano. A single note at first, clear and pure. Then another. Then a melody, slow and mournful, played by invisible hands. I watched the keys move, depressing and releasing, playing a song I'd never heard, but that felt somehow familiar, like a lullaby from a childhood I'd never had. I backed toward the door, my flashlight beam shaking. The music continued, building in complexity. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the music. A voice spoke from the darkness near the piano. A woman's voice, soft and sad. "You shouldn't be here." I ran. Not proud of it, but I ran. Out of the saloon into the street, toward my car. But the street had changed. The buildings that had been weathered and old now looked pristine, as if freshly built. Light glowed in windows. And people stood in doorways, on porches, in the street itself. They watched me with expressions of profound sorrow. There were dozens of them. Men in suits and work clothes. Women in long dresses. Children in old-fashioned play clothes. All of them translucent, like projections, like memories given temporary form. All of them dead. I froze. My rational mind had broken completely. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was older, with a beard and kind eyes that held infinite wariness. He wore a star on his vest, a sheriff's badge. "We don't get many visitors," he said. His voice had a strange quality, as if coming from very far away. "Most people can't find Stillwater anymore. It's fallen off the maps, fallen out of memory, fallen out of time itself. What happened here?" My voice came out as a whisper. "We died," he said simply. "All of us, in a single night. October 13, 1887. We went to sleep as a town, and we woke up as ghosts. We don't know why. Don't know what we did to deserve this. But we've been here ever since, living the same day over and over, waiting for something we can't name." Other figures moved closer. A young woman carrying a child, an elderly man leaning on a cane, a boy no more than 10, his face serious beyond his years. We remember our lives, the woman said. But we can't leave, can't move forward, can't die properly. We're trapped between moments, existing in a town that fell out of the world. That newspaper, I said. How did it? We make things appear sometimes, the sheriff said. When someone comes, we want them to know. Want someone to remember us. Because that's all we have left. The hope that someone, somewhere remembers that Stillwater existed, that we existed. The boy spoke up, his voice heartbreaking in its earnestness. We had names, we had families. We laughed and cried and loved and hated. We were real. We are real. But the world forgot us. And when the world forgets, what's left? What are we if no one remembers? I looked around at their faces. So many faces. Each one distinct, individual human. Each one carrying the weight of more than a century of existence without life, of consciousness without purpose, of memory without future. What do you want from me? I asked. Remember us? The sheriff said. Tell people we were here. Tell them we still are here, in a way. Tell them about Sarah, who wanted to be a teacher. He gestured to the young woman. About Thomas, who was going to take over his father's shop. The boy. About Margaret, who made the best apple pie in 3 counties. About James and Ruth and Daniel and Mary, and all of us, all 347 of us, who disappeared into nowhere and have been trying to exist ever since. They began to speak then, all of them, telling me their stories. The words overlapped, creating a tapestry of life and loss. I heard about first loves and broken hearts, about children born and parents buried, about dreams achieved and hopes abandoned. I heard about ordinary lives lived in an ordinary town until the night when ordinary became impossible. They told me about waking up after that night, finding themselves insubstantial, finding their town isolated from the world. They told me about the decades of confusion, the slow acceptance, the crushing loneliness of existence without purpose. They told me about the rare travelers who found their way here, most of whom fled in terror, a few of whom stayed to listen. There was a man 30 years ago, the sheriff said. He listened to us, wrote everything down, promised to tell the world, but he never left, couldn't leave. The town held him, or maybe we held him. We were so desperate to be remembered that we kept him here until he became one of us. A chill ran through me. Where is he? In the church, where we keep all those who stayed too long. They're not like us. They were alive when they came here. They died, really died, trapped in a place that wouldn't let them go. We don't want that for you. We don't want more prisoners. But we need you to remember. And the longer you stay, the harder it is to leave. I could feel it already. A weight in the air, pressing down, holding me in place. The town was like quicksand, and I'd been standing in it too long. You have to go now, the woman, Sarah, said. Before midnight. That's when we're strongest. When we can hold on to people whether they want to stay or not. When our need for witness becomes overwhelming. I'll remember, I said. I promise. I'll tell your stories. Will you? The sheriff's expression was sad. Or will you convince yourself this was a dream? A hallucination? Will you let rational thought erase what you've experienced here? The way the world erased us? I didn't have an answer for that. The ghosts began to fade, becoming more transparent, their voices growing fainter. The buildings around us aged in seconds, returning to their weathered, abandoned state. The light in the windows died. The only illumination was my flashlight, its beam now strong again, cutting through ordinary darkness. I was alone on the street. My car was still where I'd parked it, looking solid and real and blessedly modern. I ran to it, fumbled my keys, got the door open. The engine started immediately. I threw it in reverse, not caring about technique or caution, just needing to move, to escape, to leave this place behind. The town disappeared in my rearview mirror with impossible speed. One moment it was there, the next I was on an empty road surrounded by forest. No sign of buildings. No indication a town had ever existed in that spot. I drove for 3 hours straight before I stopped, pulling into an all-night diner filled with bright lights and normal people, and the comforting smell of coffee and grease. I sat in a booth, shaking, trying to process what had happened. Had it been real? It had felt real. But how could it have been? Ghosts aren't real. Towns don't fall out of time. None of it was possible. But I had the newspaper. I'd shoved it in my jacket pocket without thinking, and now I pulled it out. The Stillwater Chronicle, October 13, 1887. Still intact. Still readable. Physical proof that something had happened. I researched Stillwater when I got home. Found nothing. No census records. No historical documents. No mention in any book about the area's history. It was as if the town had never existed. But I had the newspaper. And I had the memories of those faces, those stories. Those people who had been forgotten by everyone except themselves. I tried to write about it. Started my book with Stillwater's story. But the words wouldn't come out right. Every time I tried to describe what I'd experienced, it sounded insane. Like fiction. Like the ravings of someone who'd spent too long alone in the dark. I showed the newspaper to historians. They said it was a hoax, though they couldn't explain the aging of the paper or the accuracy of the typeface. I showed it to paranormal investigators. They said it was proof, but their enthusiasm made me uncomfortable. They wanted to find Stillwater, to document it, to turn it into a spectacle. That wasn't what the ghosts wanted. They wanted to be remembered, yes, but with dignity, with respect. Not as a tourist attraction or a subject for ghost hunters. So I kept their secret. I didn't publish my book. I didn't share the newspaper. I just held onto their stories, carrying them alone, a single witness to an impossible truth. That was 5 years ago. Recently, I've been having dreams about Stillwater. I see the sheriff standing in my bedroom, his expression sad. I see Sarah holding her child, looking at me with pleading eyes. I see Thomas asking if I've told anyone yet, if anyone knows they existed. The newspaper has started changing. New articles appear, dated with today's date. They're all about me. About the traveler who visited Stillwater and promised to remember. About how I'm forgetting, how the memories are fading, how the stories are becoming less distinct. The latest headline appeared this morning. Witness returns home. Ghost town awaits final testimony. I know what it means. I know what they want. They want me to come back, to stay. To become one of them, a permanent witness who will never forget. Because forgetting becomes impossible when you're trapped in the moment of remembering forever. I'm fighting the urge. Every day, I fight it. But the pull is getting stronger. I find myself looking at maps, trying to remember the route. I find myself packing a bag. Getting ready for a trip I haven't consciously planned. The truth is, I don't think I have a choice. I made a promise. I said I would remember. And in failing to keep that promise, in letting their stories remain secret, I've bound myself to them in a different way. Maybe that's the real curse of Stillwater. Not that the town disappeared, but that anyone who learns its story becomes responsible for it. Becomes a carrier of memory who can never be free of the burden. I wonder if the man in the church felt this way, if he stayed willingly, or if the town pulled him back despite his resistance. If he regrets listening to their stories, or if he's found some peace in eternal witness. I'm writing this down now, while I still can. While I'm still here, still free, still alive in the normal world. I don't know how much longer that will last. The dreams are becoming more vivid. The newspaper updates more frequently. Yesterday, I woke up to find my car packed, my apartment locked, my keys in my hand, with no memory of preparing to leave. If you're reading this, know that Stillwater existed. Know that 347 people lived there once, people with names and stories and lives that mattered. Know that they disappeared in 1887, and they're still there, trapped in a moment that never ends, desperate to be remembered. Know that I tried to resist, that I fought against the pull as long as I could. But some promises can't be broken. Some stories demand to be told, and some places refuse to let their witnesses go. I'm going back tonight. I can feel it. The sun is setting, and I'm gathering my things, and soon I'll be in my car driving toward a town that doesn't exist on any map. I'll walk down that main street as darkness falls. I'll see those faces again, those ghosts who have been waiting patiently for me to keep my promise. Maybe I'll join them. Maybe I'll become another prisoner of memory, another ghost in a ghost town, telling my story to the next traveler who stumbles across Stillwater in the space between real and forgotten. Or maybe I'll finally tell their stories the way they deserve to be told. Maybe that's what they've been waiting for all along. Not just a witness, but a voice. Someone who can bridge the gap between their world and ours, who can make people understand what was lost when Stillwater fell out of time. I don't know which it will be. I won't know until I get there, until I see their faces again, until I stand in that impossible town under that endless twilight and choose whether to leave or to stay. But I'm going, tonight, as soon as I finish writing this. If I don't come back, remember what I've written here. Remember that Stillwater existed. Remember Sarah and Thomas and Margaret and all the others whose names I never learned, but whose faces I'll never forget. Remember that sometimes the world forgets entire towns, entire communities, entire groups of people who simply fall out of history's accounting. Remember that they existed anyway, that they mattered anyway. That somewhere, somehow, they're still existing, still mattering, still waiting for someone to acknowledge that they were real. The sun has set. My car is ready. The road is calling. I'll remember them. Even if it costs me everything, I'll remember. Because that's what they need. That's what we all need, in the end. To know that someone will remember we existed. That our lives meant something. That we weren't just whispers in the dark, forgotten before we even finished speaking. I'm leaving now, driving toward Stillwater, toward the ghosts who are waiting, toward the promise I made and the debt I owe. If you ever find yourself on an old road at sunset and you see a town that isn't on your map, remember this story. Remember what happened to me. Remember what happened to everyone who made the mistake of promising to remember, and then decide whether you'll stop or drive past. Whether you'll listen to their stories or protect yourself from the burden of witness. Whether you'll risk becoming another ghost in a ghost town, or whether you'll leave them to their endless forgetting. Choose wisely. Because once you promise to remember, once you truly hear them, you're bound forever. I've made my choice. I'm going home to Stillwater. May whoever finds this understand why. Story 3. I found the inn by accident, or at least that's what I told myself at the time. My car had broken down 3 hours into the mountain pass, the engine giving one final shudder before dying completely. No cell signal, no other vehicles on the road, just me, the gathering dusk, and the sound of wind moving through pine trees that seemed to lean inward, as if listening. I'd been walking for maybe 40 minutes when I saw the light. A warm glow through the trees, down a path I hadn't noticed until that exact moment. The rational choice would have been to stay with the car, wait until morning. But the temperature was dropping fast, and that light promised warmth, shelter, maybe even help. The path was well maintained, which should have been my first clue. No weeds grew between the stones. No leaves had fallen here despite the season. It was as if the earth itself kept this route clear, preserved it, maintained it for travelers who came this way. The inn appeared suddenly, materializing between the trees like something from an old woodblock print. Traditional architecture, all dark wood and paper screens, with a roof that curved upward at the corners. Lanterns hung from the eaves, casting pools of amber light. Steam rose from somewhere behind the building, carrying the mineral smell of hot springs. The entrance wasn't locked. I called out as I stepped inside, my voice echoing in the empty foyer. Traditional slippers were lined up by the door, and I could hear water moving somewhere deeper in the building. Not the sound of pipes, but something more organic, like a stream flowing beneath the floorboards.
Hello?
Is anyone here? A woman appeared so suddenly I gasped. She was elderly, dressed in a simple kimono, her hair white and pulled back in a traditional style. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were strange, dark enough to be black, reflecting the lamplight like polished stones. "Welcome," she said. Her accent was odd, old-fashioned. "We've been expecting a guest." I explained about my car, asked if I could use a phone. She listened, nodding, still smiling that unsettling smile. "No phones work here. The mountains interfere. But you're welcome to stay the night. The spring will ease your journey, wariness. In the morning, help will come." Something about her certainty made me uneasy. But what choice did I have? The night was fully dark now, and even the walk back to my car seemed impossible. She led me through corridors lit by oil lamps, past rooms with closed doors. I could hear sounds from behind some of them. Soft crying, whispered conversations. Once, a laugh that cut off abruptly, as if someone had covered the laugher's mouth. "Other guests?" I asked. "Yes, they arrived before you, all seeking the spring, all needing its benefits." My room was small but immaculate. A futon already laid out, a low table with a tea service, and a window that looked out onto darkness. No visible moon, no stars, just black pressing against the glass. The old woman gestured toward a cotton robe folded on the table. "The spring is warmest at night. You should bathe before sleeping. It will help you rest. I'm pretty tired already. Maybe you should bathe." Her voice hadn't changed. Still friendly, still welcoming. But something in it made disagreement impossible. "Everyone bathes. It's why you came here." She left before I could respond, sliding the door shut with a soft click. I sat on the futon, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Everything about this place felt wrong, but I couldn't articulate why. The hospitality was generous. The room was comfortable. Yet every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to run back into the dark and take my chances with the cold and the forest. I didn't leave. Instead, I changed into the robe and followed the sound of flowing water deeper into the inn. The corridors seemed to multiply, branching in directions that shouldn't have been possible given the building's external dimensions. More closed doors, more sounds from within. Someone was humming a tune I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. The spring was in a grotto at the back of the inn, accessible through a door that opened onto stone steps leading down. Steam filled the space, thick and mineral-scented, obscuring the far walls. The pool itself was large, the water a deep blue, green that seemed to glow faintly with its own light. I wasn't alone. 3 other people were in the water, spaced around the pool's edge. A young woman with long dark hair that floated around her like seaweed. A middle-aged man with a face that seemed frozen in an expression of mild surprise. An elderly gentleman who sat so still he might have been carved from stone. None of them acknowledged my entrance. Their eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something I couldn't see. "Hello," I ventured. No response, not even a blink. The water called to me. That's the only way I can describe it. A pull, subtle but insistent, drawing me toward the pool's edge. The heat radiating from it felt alive somehow, reaching out with invisible fingers, promising relief, comfort, answers to questions I hadn't known I was asking. I stepped in. The water was perfect. Not too hot, despite the steam. It seemed to be exactly body temperature, so that the boundary between my skin and the water blurred. I couldn't quite tell where I ended and the pool began. I sank deeper, until the water reached my chin. The bottom of the pool was smooth stone, but something about it felt strange. Carved, maybe. Patterns beneath my feet that might have been words or symbols, or simply the erosion of centuries. That's when I heard the singing, faint at first, barely audible, over the sound of water moving through hidden channels. A woman's voice, or maybe several women's voices layered on top of each other. The melody was beautiful and heartbreaking, wordless but somehow conveying meaning loss, betrayal, longing, rage. I looked at the other bathers, still motionless, still staring. "Do you hear that?" I asked the young woman closest to me. She blinked slowly, her gaze focusing on me with effort. When she spoke, her voice was hollow, echoing as if coming from the bottom of a well. "They're down there, under the water. They've been down there for a very long time. Ooh, the ones who drowned here. The ones who were drowned. They sing to call others down, to join them, to keep them company in the dark." Her eyes lost focus again, and she sank lower in the water, until only her face remained above the surface. I should have gotten out, should have run back to my room, grabbed my clothes, fled into the night. But the water held me, and the singing was growing louder, more insistent. Multiple voices now, dozens, maybe hundreds, all female, all singing the same mournful melody. I felt something brush against my leg. Not a touch exactly, more like a current, purposeful and searching. It wrapped around my ankle, gentle but insistent, tugging slightly downward. The singing was inside my head now. Not words, but images. I saw women being led into this grotto. Saw them entering the water willingly, joyfully, as if this was a gift they'd been promised. Saw them held under, their struggles weakening, their lungs filling, their eyes going wide and then distant and then dead. Sacrifices. This place had been built on sacrifice. The spring wasn't a natural formation, but a ritual site, blessed and cursed by centuries of offerings to something that lived in the mountain's heart, something older than human memory. The current around my ankle tightened. I was being pulled down slowly but steadily, deeper into the water. The pool was much deeper than I'd realized. The bottom I'd felt with my feet was just a ledge. Below was darkness, and in that darkness, things were moving, reaching up, welcoming me. I kicked free, gasping, and swam for the edge. The water resisted, becoming thick, viscous, more like oil than water. The other bathers watched me struggle with their empty eyes. The middle-aged man smiled slightly, and I realized with horror that he had no intention of leaving. None of them did. They were waiting their turn, knowing what would happen, accepting it. I hauled myself out of the pool, my limbs heavy and uncoordinated. The singing had become screaming, a cacophony of fury at my rejection. The steam twisted into shapes that might have been reaching hands, grasping for me, trying to pull me back. I ran. Up the stone steps, through the corridors, past doors that now stood open, revealing empty rooms, with only wet footprints leading to the windows. The inn was a trap. Everyone who came here either drowned in the spring or fled into the mountains, and either way, they never truly left. My room's door wouldn't open. I threw my weight against it, again and again, until it finally gave way. I grabbed my clothes, dressed frantically, my skin still wet, the smell of the spring clinging to me. The old woman was standing in the corridor when I emerged. "You cannot leave," she said, and there was pity in her voice. "No one leaves. Not once they've entered the water. The spring has touched you, claimed you. You'll find your way back. They always do. Watch me." I shoved past her and ran for the entrance. The doors were locked now, but the paper screens were just paper. I tore through one and tumbled out into the night, hitting the ground hard, rolling through dead leaves and pine needles. Behind me, the inn seemed to pulse with an amber light. The singing followed me, carried on the wind, inside the water, inside my head, inside my very bones, it seemed. I found the path and ran, my wet clothes freezing against my skin. The forest was a maze of shadows and strange sounds. Things moved in the darkness between trees. Things that kept pace with me, paralleling my flight. I could hear them breathing, or was that just my own ragged breath echoing back? My car was where I'd left it. I tried the ignition with shaking hands, expecting nothing. The engine turned over immediately, purring as if it had never died. I drove. I didn't look back. I drove until I reached a town. A real town with streetlights and 24-hour gas stations and people who didn't stare with empty eyes. That was 3 weeks ago. I should feel safe now. I'm home, hundreds of miles from those mountains. I've showered a dozen times, scrubbing my skin raw. I've thrown away the clothes I wore that night. I've tried to forget. But the singing won't stop. It's faint during the day, barely noticeable beneath the noise of normal life. At night, though, when everything is quiet, I hear it clearly. The same mournful melody. The same voices calling, beckoning, promising that the water is still warm, still waiting, still ready to embrace me. I wake up sometimes to find myself at the front door, my hand on the knob, my car keys in my other hand. I don't remember getting out of bed. Don't remember walking there. But some part of me wants to drive back, wants to return to that grotto, wants to slip back into that perfect water and sink down, down, down to where the singers wait. I've started researching the area. There are stories, if you know where to look. A hot spring inn that appears and disappears. Travelers who go missing in those mountains. A tradition of sacrifice dating back centuries, offerings to a water deity that grew hungry, that demanded more and more, until the offerings became permanent residents of the spring's depths. The inn feeds on travelers, uses them to sustain whatever lives in that water. And once you've entered the pool, once the water has touched you, you're marked, claimed. You'll return eventually, no matter how far you run. The singing will grow louder and louder until you can't think of anything else, until every thought is of that warmth, that peace, that perfect moment of surrender as the water closes over your head. I see the others sometimes in my dreams. The young woman with floating hair, the surprised man, the still gentleman. They're not dead, exactly. They exist in the water, sustained by it, part of it now. And they sing with the others, adding their voices to the chorus that never stops. I've tried finding the inn again on maps. The road I drove on doesn't seem to exist. The coordinates I estimated lead to empty forest. But I know it's there. I know it's waiting. The old woman told me no one leaves, and she was right. I left physically, but something of me stayed behind in that water, and something of the water left with me. I can taste it sometimes. Minerals and age and something else, something older than taste, than sense, than language. It's inside me. Growing. spreading, making me part of the spring even as I'm here, miles away, pretending I'm still entirely human. The others I've met online have the same story. Different years, different circumstances, but always the same inn, the same spring, the same singing. Some of them have been fighting it for decades. Others have already given up, already accepted that they'll return. One woman told me she's made the drive back 17 times, always turning around at the last minute, always fleeing back to safety. But each time, it gets harder to turn away. Each time, the water's call grows stronger. She says she knows that eventually, one night soon, she won't turn back. She'll take the path down to the inn. She'll change into the robe. She'll descend the stone steps. She'll enter the water. And this time, she won't struggle. She'll let herself sink, let herself become part of the eternal spring, adding her voice to the song that calls the next traveler down. I understand now. I understand that the inn is patient. It doesn't need to chase. It doesn't need to force. It just waits, singing its beautiful, terrible song, knowing that time is on its side, knowing that the market left on me will eventually become unbearable. Already, I find myself looking at maps of those mountains. Already, I find myself planning routes, calculating drive times, making excuses about why I might need to go back to that area. My dreams are full of warm water and peace and voices harmonizing in the dark. The old woman said help would come in the morning. She was right. Help did come. But what she didn't say was that the help was for the spring, not for me. I walked away, yes, but in doing so, I've become a beacon. The mark I carry will draw others to that place. People who see the longing in my eyes, who ask where it comes from, who become curious about the story I try so hard not to tell. Even writing this is part of it. Part of the spreading. You're reading this now, and maybe you're curious. Maybe you'll try to find the inn. Maybe you'll succeed where I failed and make it into that perfect water. Maybe you'll add your voice to the song. I hear it right now. It's midnight, and the singing is so loud I can barely think. My keys are in my hand. I don't remember picking them up. My feet are carrying me toward the door. I'm not fighting as hard as I did yesterday or the day before that. Maybe tonight is the night I stop fighting altogether. Maybe tonight, I finally go home. Because that's what the spring is promising now. Not death, not drowning. Just coming home to the place I've always belonged, to the water that has claimed me, to the singers who wait patiently for me to join them. The pull is almost gentle, almost loving, almost impossible to resist. If you're reading this and I'm gone, you'll know where to find me. 3rd hour into the mountain pass, when your car breaks down, and it will break down, follow the path to the light, enter the inn, change into the robe, descend to the grotto, listen for my voice. I'll be singing with the others. The water is warm. The water is waiting. The water is calling us all home. Story 4. The camping trip had been Marcus's idea. He'd been talking about it for months. 3 days in the wilderness. Just the two of us under open sky. Away from screens and obligations and the grinding routine of adult life. I'd agreed, though with less enthusiasm than he felt. I'm not naturally drawn to the outdoors. But I loved him. And sometimes love means doing things that don't come naturally. We drove up Friday evening and arrived at our campsite just as the sun was setting. The spot was perfect, a small clearing near a creek, surrounded by pine trees that seemed ancient and impossibly tall. We set up the tent, built a fire, and settled into the easy rhythm of two people who'd learned to be comfortable in silence together. As the darkness deepened, the stars emerged. First just a few, then dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. I'd seen stars before, but never like this. The city light pollution I'd grown up with had made the night sky feel like a luxury, something you had to travel to experience. Now it stretched above us in such overwhelming abundance that I felt simultaneously insignificant and deeply held by the universe. "It's beautiful," Marcus said softly, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the stars themselves. "It is," I agreed. We sat by the fire, drinking coffee that was already growing cold, wrapped in blankets, occasionally pointing out constellations we recognized. But mostly we just sat. The world felt right in a way it usually didn't. Around midnight, Marcus decided to go to sleep. The fire was dying down to embers, and he was exhausted from the drive. He disappeared into the tent, leaving me alone with the fire and the stars. I told myself I'd go in after finishing my coffee. I'd sit for just a few more minutes. I don't know how long I actually sat there. Time felt different in that place, less rigid, more fluid. The fire burned lower. The night grew deeper. The stars seemed to grow brighter, as though the darkness was allowing them to shine with full intensity. That's when I noticed something unusual. Among the thousands of stars, there was a light that moved differently than the others. It wasn't moving like a satellite. No. Satellites moved too quickly and with predictable geometry. This light was slower, deliberate, as though exploring the sky. It traced a meandering path across the constellations, pausing sometimes, then continuing on. I watched it, fascinated. At first, I thought I must be hallucinating. The stars, the fire, the isolation. Maybe it had all combined to create some kind of waking dream. But no, it was definitely there. Definitely moving. Definitely not a star or planet or anything else that naturally inhabited the sky. I reached over to shake Marcus awake. Then I stopped myself. Would he see it? Would he confirm what I was seeing? Or would he tell me it was just a plane, just a meteor, just my exhausted mind playing tricks? I watched the light instead. It moved in a slow arc across the eastern quadrant of the sky, and as it did, I became aware of something else. More lights, others like the first one, but dimmer, as though more distant. They seemed to be responding to the first light's movement, converging toward it or towards something near it. My pulse quickened. I stood up, my neck craned back, watching this impromptu constellation take shape. There must have been 8 or 9 of them now, all moving with that same slow, deliberate intention. They weren't following any trajectory I recognized. They weren't moving like aircraft or natural phenomena. They were moving like intelligence. "Marcus," I called out, not wanting to take my eyes off the lights. "Marcus, wake up. You need to see this." I heard him groan from inside the tent. After a moment, he emerged, looking irritated and confused.
"What is it? What's wrong, Unc?"
I pointed upward. "Look at the sky." He looked, and I watched his expression shift from annoyance to confusion to something that might have been fear. "What are those?" he whispered. "I don't know." We both stood there, tilted back, watching the lights move through the darkness. As we watched, more appeared. The original light, the one I'd seen first, seemed to be gathering them. They were forming a loose circle now, revolving around some invisible point. "This isn't happening," Marcus said. "This isn't real. We're both seeing it," I said. "So it's happening." As the lights continued their strange dance, I became aware of a sensation I couldn't quite name. It was almost like pressure, not physical pressure, but something pressing against my consciousness. The way the air feels before a storm, thick and electric. Marcus grabbed my hand. "We should go inside." We should go inside the tent. But neither of us moved. The lights were brightening now, or perhaps just growing larger. The circle they'd formed was tightening. the lights moving closer to their shared center. And the pressure I felt was intensifying, that strange sensation of something vast paying attention to us, to me. And then, abruptly, the lights stopped moving. They hung in the sky, perfectly motionless, arranged in that tight circle. I felt something then. Not quite a touch, not quite a presence, but something reaching out toward me, toward us, like recognition. Marcus made a small sound, something between a gasp and a cry. "Let's go inside," he said urgently. "Let's go inside right now." We ran to the tent. Once inside, we zipped it shut as though that thin fabric could protect us from what was above. We huddled together, neither of us speaking, listening to our hearts race in the darkness. Minutes passed, hours maybe, I couldn't tell. Eventually, the adrenaline faded and a kind of numb exhaustion took over. I must have dozed, because I remember waking to gray light filtering through the tent. Marcus was already up. I could see his silhouette moving around outside. "Are they still there?" I called out. "I don't know," he said. "I can't look. I'm afraid if I look at them, I don't know what they'll do." We packed that morning in near silence. Something had shifted between us, or within us. The world felt less solid than it had the day before. The forest, which had seemed ancient and timeless, now felt like a thin illusion. Something that could be torn away to reveal what really lay beneath. We drove back to the city without speaking much. When we reached my apartment, Marcus didn't come inside. He just sat in the car, staring out the windshield. He asked finally. "No," I said. "How do you know?" "Because we both saw it. And because I can still feel." I paused, searching for the words. "I can still feel them, like they're watching." He nodded slowly. "I know what you mean. It's been 6 weeks since that night. Marcus and I have tried to go back to normal, but there's a distance between us now. We love each other, I think, but something has changed. Neither of us wants to talk about what we saw. When it comes up accidentally in conversation, which it rarely does, we both become anxious and evasive. But I think about it constantly, every night. When I look at the stars from my apartment window, I look for those lights. I haven't seen them return, but sometimes I see something else. A disturbance in the pattern, a slight shimmer, as though something is moving behind the stars themselves, hidden but present. And I can't shake the sensation of being watched. Not aggressively, not threateningly, but with a kind of interest that feels alien and vast and utterly impossible to understand. Last week, I read an article about unusual meteor showers observed by astronomers the same night we were camping. The article mentioned strange light patterns that didn't match any known satellite system or natural phenomenon. Scientists are still investigating. Marcus saw that article too. He texted me, "Do you think they know? Do you think they know what it was?" I didn't respond. What could I say? That the lights were still exploring our sky. That whatever guided them hadn't finished investigating our world yet. Sometimes, in the dark of night, I go back to that moment, sitting by the fire, watching the stars intensify and multiply until the sky itself seemed alive. I try to remember if there was any moment when I could have closed my eyes, looked away, refused to see, but there wasn't. Once you've seen something like that, once you've felt that vast attention focused on you, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to comfortable ignorance. The stars are still out there, still moving, still watching. And I'm still here, still watched, still waiting to understand what they wanted, what they're still waiting for. And sometimes I wonder, did they choose to show themselves to us in that clearing? Was it random chance, or was there intention? Did they select us deliberately? The questions keep me awake at night, long after Marcus has fallen asleep. They keep me staring at the ceiling, aware that somewhere above, beyond the light pollution of the city, the stars are turning in their ancient dance. And I'm part of something now, something cosmic and inexplicable. Something that showed me that our world and their world aren't as separate as we'd like to believe. Story 5. I took the job at the Millbrook Hotel because I needed the silence. After the divorce, after the long months of shouting and lawyers, and the painful division of everything we'd built together, I craved isolation. The night desk position was perfect. 11 at night until 7 in the morning, alone in the grand lobby of a hotel that had seen better decades. Responsible for nothing but checking in the occasional late arrival and responding to the even more occasional guest complaint. The hotel manager, Mrs. Chen, showed me around on my first evening. She was a small woman with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of concern. "It's a quiet place," she said as we walked through the ornate lobby with its faded Persian rugs and brass fixtures that had oxidized to a gentle green. "Most of our guests are regulars. They like the old world feel. They appreciate discretion." She led me down the main corridor on the second floor. The hallway stretched impossibly long, doors lining both sides in perfect symmetry, wall sconces casting pools of amber light every 15 feet. The carpet was a deep burgundy, thick enough to swallow sound. "This is the original wing," she explained, "built in 1924. Some guests specifically request rooms in this corridor. They say it has character. What it had was age." I could smell it. Not decay exactly, but a kind of settled permanence, as if the building had breathed the same air for so long it had become part of the structure itself. The wallpaper was silk, patterned with tiny flowers that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. And the corridor felt longer than it should be, as if perspective worked differently here, bending the space to accommodate more rooms than the building's exterior could possibly contain. "You'll do rounds every hour," Mrs. Chen continued. "Walk each floor, make sure everything is secure. But don't disturb the guests. Some of them are light sleepers." That first night, I settled behind the mahogany desk in the lobby, my computer casting a blue glow in the dimness. The hotel was nearly full. According to the reservation system, 43 of 50 rooms occupied. But I'd seen no one since Mrs. Chen left at 11. The building was utterly silent in that way old buildings never really are. There should have been sounds. Pipes creaking, the building settling, distant traffic from the street outside. But there was nothing. Just silence pressing against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat, the rush of blood through my veins. At midnight, I began my first round. The elevator was an ancient cage affair, all brass and mirror, and it rose with a mechanical grinding that seemed obscenely loud in the stillness. I stepped out onto the second floor, into that endless corridor, and began my walk. That's when I heard them. Footsteps. They came from ahead of me, regular and unhurried. The sound of leather soles on carpet muffled but distinct. Someone was walking toward me down the corridor. I stopped, waiting to see who else was up at this hour, perhaps a guest heading to the ice machine or returning from a late night out. But no one appeared. The footsteps continued, growing closer, but the corridor ahead remained empty. The pools of light from the wall sconces showed nothing but burgundy carpet and numbered doors, all closed, all silent. I called out, "Hello." The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, heavier now as if offended by my voice. I waited, my heart beginning to beat faster, telling myself it was acoustics, just strange echoes in an old building. Old buildings were full of sounds that seemed to come from nowhere. I continued walking, and the footsteps resumed. This time they were behind me. I spun around, but the corridor was empty in that direction too. Just those doors with their brass numbers, 217, 216, 2 Winfive, receding into the distance, and the amber light creating pools of shadow between each sconce. The footsteps matched my pace exactly, staying always just behind me, just out of sight. When I stopped, they stopped. When I walked faster, they accelerated to keep up. By the time I reached the end of the corridor and turned the corner, my breath was coming fast, my skin prickling with a fear I couldn't quite justify. The rest of my rounds were uneventful. The other floors were quiet in a normal way. I could hear a television murmuring behind one door, water running in a bathroom somewhere. The small living sounds that fill a populated building. But when I returned to the lobby, I found myself reluctant to do the next round, to walk that second floor corridor again. At 1 a.m., I forced myself. The footsteps returned immediately, though this time they seemed to come from beside me, as if someone were walking parallel to me, just inside the walls. I pressed my hand against the silk wallpaper and felt it. A subtle vibration like footsteps, but not quite. More like the echo of footsteps. The memory of someone walking this corridor so many times that the building itself had learned the rhythm. I completed my round quickly and returned to the desk, where I tried to focus on paperwork, on email, on anything but the thought of that corridor and its invisible walker. But at 2 a.m., at 3 a.m., at 4 a.m., I had to go back. And each time the footsteps were there, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, once seeming to come from directly above me, as if someone were walking on the ceiling. On my fifth round, at 5 in the morning, I found the courage to try something. When the footsteps started behind me, I didn't walk forward. Instead, I walked backward, slowly, carefully, moving toward the sound rather than away from it. The footsteps continued approaching. We moved toward each other like partners in a strange dance, and as the sound grew closer, I began to feel something else. A coldness in the air, a pressure, as if the space itself were becoming denser, more substantial. The lights flickered. The wallpaper's flowers seemed to bloom and wilt in rapid succession. And then, for just a moment, I saw it. Not a person exactly. More like the outline of where a person should be. A distortion in the air, a fold in reality shaped like someone walking. And in that shape, I sensed purpose, destination, an urgent need to reach somewhere, to arrive, to finally complete a journey that had been interrupted somehow, left unfinished. Then it was past me, continuing down the corridor, the footsteps fading into the distance. And I was alone again with my hammering heart and the smell of old silk and older secrets. I mentioned the footsteps to Mrs. Chen the next morning when she arrived to relieve me. She didn't seem surprised. "The second floor," she said, nodding slowly. "Yes, some of the staff hear things there. We try to keep our best guests in that wing, though. They appreciate the atmosphere." "Who is it?" I asked. "The person walking." She looked at me with those stretched, concerned eyes. "Does it matter? Old hotels have their residents. Not all of them check out." But I couldn't let it go. During my days off, I visited the local library and searched through old newspapers, looking for anything about the Millbrook Hotel. I found plenty. It had been the finest hotel in the city once, hosting celebrities and politicians, society weddings and important business deals. But in 1952, something had happened. A man named Robert Holloway had checked into room 224 on a Wednesday evening in October. He was a salesman, traveling through the city on his way to somewhere else. His wife was expecting him home by Friday, but Robert Holloway never checked out. On Thursday morning, a maid found room 224 empty, the bed unslept in, his suitcase still packed. His car was in the hotel garage. His belongings were untouched, but Robert Holloway himself had vanished. The police investigated. The hotel searched. His wife came from 3 states away, desperate for answers. But Robert Holloway had simply ceased to exist somewhere between checking in and Thursday morning. The case was never solved. Eventually, it faded from memory, becoming just another mysterious disappearance in a decade full of them. Room 224. I looked up the hotel's floor plan. It was in the 2nd floor corridor, roughly in the middle of that impossible length. On my next shift, I walked that corridor differently. I counted doors, finding 224 exactly where it should be. The door looked like all the others. Dark wood, brass numbers, no indication that anything unusual had ever happened behind it. According to the computer system, the room was vacant that night. I used my master key to open it. The room was pristine, decorated in the same period style as the rest of the hotel. Art Deco furniture, heavy curtains, a bathroom with black and white hexagonal tiles. It smelled faintly of lavender and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. Old paper, perhaps, or old promises. I sat on the bed and waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. I was beginning to feel foolish when I heard them. The footsteps, unmistakable now, coming down the corridor. They approached the door, steady and determined, and then stopped, just outside. I held my breath. The doorknob turned, but the door didn't open. Instead, I heard a sound I'll never forget, a sigh deep and exhausted, full of a longing so profound it made my chest ache. And then the footsteps resumed, moving past the door, continuing down the corridor toward some destination they would never reach. I understood then. Robert Holloway was still walking to his room, still trying to complete that simple journey from the lobby to 224. Still carrying his suitcase and his thoughts of home, and his certainty that this was just another overnight stop in a life full of them. But something had interrupted him. Death, perhaps sudden and silent in this corridor, his heart stopping between one step and the next. Or perhaps something stranger, a fold in time. A moment when the building took him and wouldn't let go. Whatever the cause, he was trapped in that walk, in those steps, in the eternal corridor of his last living moments, trying again and again to reach a room he would never enter. Night after night, I heard him. The footsteps became as familiar as my own breathing. I learned to recognize his pace, steady but wary, the walk of a man who'd been traveling too long. Sometimes I would stand in the corridor and listen as he passed, feeling that cold pressure, that distortion in the air, and I would whisper, "Room 224 is just ahead. You're almost there." The footsteps would pause, as if he'd heard me, as if some part of him knew I was trying to help. But then they would resume, continuing past his door, unable to deviate from whatever path had been laid down that October night in 1952. Other staff members avoided the 2nd floor corridor when they could. But the guests who stayed there seemed to find it comforting. I overheard one elderly woman telling Mrs. Chen that she appreciated the presence in that wing, that it made her feel less alone at night. Another guest, a businessman who came twice a month, specifically requested a room in the corridor. "I like knowing someone else is up walking," he told me. "Makes the insomnia feel less isolating." And slowly, I began to understand. The footsteps weren't frightening, not really. They were sad. They were the sound of someone lost, someone trying to find their way home, someone who had been interrupted mid-journey and couldn't accept that the journey was over. I started staying longer in the corridor during my rounds. I would sit on the bench near the window at the far end and wait for him to pass. Sometimes I would tell him about my day, about the weather, about the small details of life that someone dead for 70 years might have forgotten. I told him about my divorce, about the life I'd left behind, about how I'd come here looking for silence, but found instead this strange companionship with someone who couldn't answer back. We're both stuck. I told him one night as the footsteps approached. You in your walk, me in my waiting. Neither of us moving forward, both of us afraid of what comes next. The footsteps stopped, right in front of me, and in the silence that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Seen, known, understood by someone, even if that someone was nothing but air and memory and the echo of steps taken long ago. Months passed. The seasons changed outside, but in the corridor. Time was frozen in perpetual amber light and burgundy carpet. The footsteps continued their nightly walk, and I continued listening for them, waiting for them, finding an odd comfort in their reliability. Everything else in my life might be uncertain, but Robert Halloway would walk that corridor night after night, forever. Then one evening, a woman checked in. She was in her 70s, elegant in a way that spoke of old money and careful maintenance. I'd like a room in the original wing, she told me. Second floor, if possible. I stayed here once, many years ago. I gave her room 226, 2 doors down from 224. She smiled when I handed her the key, a sad, knowing smile. Thank you. I've been meaning to come back for a long time. That night, during my midnight round, I found her standing in the corridor. She was in a nightgown and robe, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, and she was listening. When she saw me, she put a finger to her lips. "Can you hear him?" she whispered. I nodded. "He's still looking," she said. "After all these years, still trying to find his way. Did you know him?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. Then I was supposed to meet him. Room 224, October 1952. I was young and foolish and married to someone else, and Robert was going to take me away from all of it. We were going to run away together. But I got cold feet. I never came. And her voice broke. He waited. He walked that corridor, pacing, wondering why I'd stood him up. And something happened. His heart, they said. The stress. The disappointment. He died waiting for me. I felt cold. You've known all along. I've known. And I've been walking too in my own way. Walking through a life I built on cowardice. Hearing his footsteps in every quiet moment, knowing he was still here, still waiting. She looked at me with eyes that held decades of regret. I came back to tell him I'm sorry. To tell him he can stop walking now. That I'm here. She turned toward the sound of the approaching footsteps. She opened her arms. And as the invisible presence passed through that spot, something changed. The air warmed. The pressure lifted. And for just a moment, I swear this is true, I saw them both, young again, standing in that corridor, finally meeting, finally completing the encounter that had been interrupted so long ago. The footsteps stopped. The corridor fell silent in a new way, a peaceful way, as if the building itself had exhaled a breath it had been holding for 70 years. The woman from room 226 was found the next morning, passed away peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face. And from that night forward, the second floor corridor was quiet. No more footsteps, no more cold pressure, just a normal hotel hallway with burgundy carpet and amber lights. I thought I'd be relieved. But instead, I felt a profound loneliness. Robert Halloway had been my companion through those long nights, proof that something persists, that unfinished business matters, that love and longing are strong enough to defy time itself. But something else changed too. Without the footsteps to listen for, I began to hear my own life again. The possibilities I'd been avoiding, the future I'd been afraid to plan. Robert had been trapped in his interrupted journey, unable to move forward. But I didn't have to be. I gave notice the next week. Mrs. Chen didn't seem surprised. "The corridor served its purpose for you," she said. "It shows people what it needs to show them." "What do you mean?" I asked. She smiled that tight smile. "Old hotels have their residents. Some of them are in the walls. Some of them are in the chairs behind the desk. Some of them don't even know they're ghosts yet. But the building teaches them, eventually. It taught Robert. It taught you." I left the Millbrook Hotel on a Tuesday morning in spring. As I walked to my car, I looked up at the second floor windows, at the corridor where I'd spent so many nights, listening to the echoes of a life cut short, a love unfulfilled, a journey interrupted. And I understood that we're all walking corridors of one kind or another, trying to reach destinations we may never arrive at, pacing through our unfinished business, our interrupted plans, our abandoned dreams. The question is whether we'll walk those corridors forever, or whether we'll find the courage to stop, to turn toward the possibility of change, to accept that some journeys end differently than we planned. Robert Halloway walked for 70 years before he could stop. I walked for one. And now, finally, I'm ready to find out where the corridor leads. Not the one in the hotel, but the one in my own life, the path I've been too afraid to follow. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear footsteps. But now they're just footsteps. My neighbor upstairs, a stranger on the street, the sound of life moving forward. And I smile, grateful that I'm no longer frozen in the amber light of that corridor, no longer walking the same path over and over, waiting for something that will never come. But I think of Robert sometimes, and I hope that wherever he is now, he's finally reached his room. I hope the door opened for him at last, and I hope that inside, someone was waiting, someone who'd walked just as far, just as long, to meet him there. Because that's what the corridor taught me. It's never too late to arrive. Never too late to complete the journey. We're all just walking until we find the place, or the person, that lets us finally stop and say, "I'm home." Story 6. The power went out at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in February. I remember the exact time because I'd been watching the clock, counting down the minutes until I could reasonably go to bed. After 3 months in the apartment, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was trespassing in someone else's life, sleeping in someone else's bed, existing in spaces that had been shaped by the presence of someone I'd never known. The apartment had been my aunt's before she died. She'd lived here for 30 years, alone, private. Leaving behind rooms full of furniture I couldn't bear to change in photographs of people whose names I didn't know. I'd inherited it out of necessity. My lease was ending. My savings were thin, and Aunt Margaret had left me her place in a will I'd been surprised to be mentioned in at all. We'd never been close. I'd seen her perhaps 5 times in my entire life, always at family gatherings where she sat in corners and spoke to no one. When the lights went out, I was sitting on my couch, trying to read by the lamp that suddenly extinguished itself. The darkness was immediate and complete. The building was old, built before the age of digital clocks and standby lights, so when the power died, it took every photon with it. I sat in blackness, so absolute I couldn't see my hand when I held it inches from my face. I waited for my eyes to adjust, for the ambient light from the street to filter through the windows. But the darkness remained solid, impenetrable. Even the window. I could sense its location, could picture exactly where it was, showed nothing. No streetlights, no passing cars, no glow from neighboring buildings. The blackout must be widespread, I thought. The whole block, maybe the whole neighborhood. I fumbled for my phone, my hands patting the couch cushions where I'd left it. My fingers found the smooth glass, lifted it, pressed the power button. Nothing happened. The phone was dead, though I'd charged it fully an hour ago. I tried the button again, holding it longer, willing the screen to light up. But it remained dark, inert, as if the power failure had somehow drained every battery in the apartment simultaneously. I stood carefully, hands outstretched, moving toward where I remembered the kitchen to be. I had candles in the drawer by the sink, matches in the cabinet above. I'd bought them my first week here, some instinct telling me that old buildings were prone to electrical problems. My fingers trailed along the wall, feeling the subtle texture of wallpaper that was probably older than I was. The apartment felt different in the dark, larger somehow, the room stretching away from me in dimensions that didn't quite match my memory. I counted my steps, measuring the distance to the kitchen. But the wall continued longer than it should have, the corner that marked the doorway refusing to appear. I stopped, disoriented. The apartment was only 800 square feet. The living room to the kitchen was 15 steps, maybe 20 if I went slowly. I'd walked at least 30, and the wall still stretched ahead of me, unbroken, endless. I turned back, retracing my steps. But now I couldn't find the couch, couldn't find any of the furniture I knew had to be there. My hands grasped empty air. My feet found only clear floor. The apartment had somehow emptied itself while I fumbled through the dark. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding strange and flat, as if the darkness were absorbing the sound. "Is anyone there?" No one answered. But in the silence that followed, I heard something else, a faint rustling, like fabric brushing against fabric, or paper sliding across paper. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me, emanating from the walls themselves. I stood very still, listening. The rustling continued, rhythmic and purposeful, as if something were moving through the apartment, navigating the darkness with ease, while I stood lost in my own living room. Then I saw it, a shadow, darker than the surrounding blackness, moving along the wall. But that was impossible. Shadows require light. You can't have shadow without something to cast it, without illumination to interrupt. Yet there it was undeniably present, a shape that moved with fluid purpose, elongating and contracting as it traveled across the wall I couldn't see, but somehow could sense. The shadow was vaguely human, shaped, but wrong. The proportions were distorted. The limbs too long, the torso too narrow, the head an odd, tilted oval. It moved in a way that suggested walking, but without the up and down motion of footsteps. Instead, it glided, smooth and continuous, like something floating or something that had forgotten how human bodies actually moved. I pressed myself against the wall, or where I thought the wall was, and watched the shadow pass. It seemed not to notice me, or perhaps it was aware but indifferent, focused on some purpose I couldn't fathom. As it moved, I noticed others. More shadows, emerging from different directions, crossing paths without intersecting, each moving with that same unsettling glide. They were darker than the darkness, somehow. They were absence made visible, voids cut into reality. And they were multiplying. What had been one shadow became 3, then 7, then too many to count. They filled the invisible space around me, a silent procession of impossible shapes moving through my apartment with the confidence of residents, not intruders. I realized then that the shadows weren't random. They were moving along specific paths, tracing routes through the apartment as if following well-worn tracks. And as I watched, I began to recognize those routes. One shadow moved from where the couch should be to where the kitchen would be. The exact path I walked a dozen times each day. Another glided from the bedroom area to the bathroom, pausing at the spot where the hallway narrowed, just as I always did to avoid bumping into the protruding closet door. These were my movements, my daily patterns, my routines. The shadows were walking through my life, performing my actions in the darkness, as if the apartment were playing back every step I'd taken since moving in, every gesture, every moment of habitation rendered as negative space. But there were other shadows too, ones that followed paths I'd never walked. They moved differently, with rhythms and patterns I didn't recognize. One shadow, tall and thin, with that tilted oval head, moved from the bedroom to the window, pausing there for long moments before returning. Over and over, the same journey. Another shadow sat at the dining table, its form compressed and hunched, remaining motionless for what felt like hours. These were her movements. Aunt Margaret's. The routes she'd walked for 30 years, the places she'd paused, the habits that had worn themselves into the apartment's memory. The building was playing back her life too, showing me the ghost of her presence. The shadow, record of 3 decades of solitary existence. I wanted to move, to run, to find the door and escape into the hallway, where surely there would be light, other people, normalcy. But I couldn't remember where the door was. In the darkness, with the shadows multiplying around me, the apartment had become a maze of overlapping memories, past and present tangled together, and I was lost in it. The shadows continued their routines. I watched myself, or the shadow version of myself, move through my evening rituals, making tea in the kitchen, sitting on the couch with a book, checking my phone, walking to the window to look at the street below. Each action rendered in darkness, each movement a void sliding through greater void. And I watched Aunt Margaret too. Her shadows were different from mine, more numerous, more varied, carved deeper into the apartment's memory by decades of repetition. I watched her wake each morning and move to the kitchen. Watched her sit at the table with her coffee, always in the same chair. Watched her pace the living room in the evening, back and forth, a restless circuit that spoke of loneliness and long nights. Time passed, though I had no way to measure it. The shadows continued their performances, and slowly, I began to understand. The apartment was haunted, but not by ghosts in any traditional sense. It was haunted by habit, by routine, by the accumulated weight of actions repeated so many times they'd worn grooves into reality itself. And in the darkness, when the normal rules of light and shadow suspended themselves, those grooves became visible, playing out their recorded movements, whether anyone was there to perform them or not. But there was something else too. As I watched, I began to notice discrepancies. My shadow self did things I didn't remember doing. It stood at the window longer than I ever had, staring out at something I couldn't see. It paused in doorways, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. It moved through the apartment with a hesitation I didn't recognize as mine, as if uncertain, as if afraid. Was this really my shadow? Or was it changing, being influenced by the older shadows, the deeper grooves? Was I watching my future self, showing me what I would become if I stayed here long enough? Would I start pacing like Aunt Margaret had paced, wearing my own grooves into the apartment's memory, creating my own darkness, shadows for some future tenant to witness? The thought filled me with a dread I'd never experienced before. To become a shadow, a pattern, a set of routines repeated until they erased the person performing them. That was a kind of death more frightening than any ending. I had to move, had to break the pattern, had to do something different from what the shadows showed me doing. I pushed away from the wall, and walked in a direction I'd never gone, cutting across the apartment at an angle that intersected none of my established routes. My hands found nothing. No furniture, no walls, just empty space stretching infinitely. But I kept walking, forcing myself forward, refusing to follow the paths I'd already worn. And slowly, gradually, the shadows began to react. They turned their absent faces toward me. They paused in their routines. They watched me with their void eyes as I carved a new route through the darkness, creating a pattern they hadn't seen before. Some of them tried to follow. I could feel them behind me, attempting to mimic my path, to add this new routine to their repertoire. But I kept changing direction, kept moving unpredictably, refusing to establish a pattern they could memorize. And one by one, they fell away, unable to follow, returning to their established routes. Except for one. A shadow that matched my height and shape, but moved with perfect fluidity, with none of my hesitation or fear. It stayed with me, mirroring my movements exactly, anticipating my turns before I made them. And I realized, with a cold certainty, that this wasn't my shadow from the past. This was my shadow from the future. The pattern I would eventually wear into the apartment if I stayed long enough. If I let myself be shaped by these walls the way Aunt Margaret had been shaped. It was showing me my fate. 30 years of the same routines. 30 years of the same paths. 30 years of becoming a shadow myself, moving through life without really living, trapped in patterns, so deep they would outlast my death, playing out in the darkness for whoever came next. No, I said aloud. My voice echoed strangely, multiplying, as if the shadows were repeating my words back to me. No, I won't. I stopped walking. The future shadow stopped too, waiting to see what I would do next, ready to record it, to make it permanent. We stood facing each other in the darkness. Both of us invisible, both of us nothing but absence and potential. And then I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I stood still. I refused to move, refused to create any pattern at all. I simply existed in the darkness, breathing, being, refusing to perform any action that could be recorded and repeated. The future shadow waited. The other shadows continued their circuits around me, moving through their established routes. But I remained motionless, breaking the cycle simply by refusing to participate in it. I don't know how long I stood there. Hours, maybe. Or minutes that felt like hours. Time had no meaning in the darkness. But eventually, I felt something change. The air shifted. The quality of the darkness altered, becoming less solid, less oppressive. And then, suddenly, light. The lamps flickered on. The digital clocks blinked 1200. My phone, when I picked it up, showed it had 78% battery, and the time was 9:51 p.m., only 4 minutes after the power had gone out. The apartment looked normal. The furniture was where it had always been. The kitchen was 15 steps away, not 30. The walls were walls, not endless corridors. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for one thing. On the wall opposite the couch, I saw a shadow. My shadow cast by the lamp behind me, falling across the faded wallpaper in perfectly normal proportions. But it wasn't moving quite right. It tilted its head a fraction of a second before I tilted mine. It raised its hand a moment before I raised mine. It moved with a fluid, gliding motion that my physical body couldn't quite match. The shadow had learned. In those minutes, or hours, of darkness, it had become something slightly separate from me. Something that anticipated rather than followed. It was still my shadow, still attached to me, but it had its own ideas now about how I should move, where I should go, what patterns I should follow. I stood up quickly, and the shadow stood too, but its movements were smoother, more practiced. As if it had stood up from that couch 1,000 times, and knew exactly how to do it most efficiently. I walked to the kitchen, and the shadow glided along the wall beside me, taking the path it preferred, the road it thought I should always take. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt something else, a strange kind of understanding. The shadow was showing me what I would become if I let myself fall into patterns, if I allowed routine to replace conscious choice. It was a warning, not a threat. Over the following weeks, I paid attention to the shadow. In normal light, it behaved normally, falling where shadows should fall, moving when I moved. But sometimes, in dim light or at certain angles, I caught it moving differently, more smoothly, more confidently, following paths I hadn't chosen yet, showing me the routes it thought I would eventually take. And I made a promise to myself I would never let the shadow lead. I would change my routines constantly, take different paths through the apartment, sit in different chairs, vary my movements enough that no pattern could ever fully establish itself. I would remain unpredictable, even to my own shadow. The apartment, I realized, wanted to shape me. It had shaped Aunt Margaret, had turned her into a series of repeated movements, had absorbed her so completely that her shadows still walked here years after her death. The building itself was a kind of trap, patient and subtle, waiting for residents to relax into routine, to let habit replace choice, to become predictable enough to record and replay. But knowing the trap was there meant I could avoid it. Every day, I did something different. Took a new route through the rooms. Stood in places I'd never stood before. Broke any routine before it could fully form. And my shadow, that slightly, too smooth reflection of my future self, began to move less confidently. It hesitated more. It followed instead of leading. I was teaching it that I couldn't be predicted. That I wouldn't wear grooves into this place deep enough to outlast my presence. That I was passing through, not staying, and would leave no shadows behind when I finally left. Sometimes, late at night, I turned off all the lights. I stood in the darkness and listened for the rustling of other shadows, the ones that belonged to Aunt Margaret, the ones that had been here long before me. They were still there, still walking their routes, still trapped in their patterns. But they seemed fainter now, as if my refusal to join them was somehow weakening their hold on the apartment. Or maybe that was wishful thinking. Maybe they were just as strong as ever, just as permanent, and would continue their dark processions long after I was gone. Maybe every person who lived here added their own shadows to the collection, layer upon layer of habit and routine building up like sediment, until the apartment was more shadow than substance. But that won't be me. I won't leave myself behind in this place. I won't let my routines become so deeply carved that they continue without me. When I leave, and I will leave, I've already started looking for a new place. I'll take my shadow with me. All of it. Every movement, every pattern, every trace of my presence. The power has gone out 3 more times since that first night. Each time, I've stood in the darkness and watched the shadows perform their routines. And each time, I've noticed something new. The shadows are aware of each other. They don't collide, don't overlap, but they acknowledge one another in subtle ways. A pause when another shadow passes. A slight deviation en route to allow another passage. They coexist in the darkness. All these recorded lives, all these accumulated patterns, sharing the space like echoes sharing a cave. And I've noticed that some shadows are fading. The oldest ones, presumably, movements so ancient that time itself has begun to erode them. They glide through their routes with increasing transparency, their forms less defined, until eventually they'll be gone completely, forgotten even by the apartment that recorded them. Aunt Margaret's shadows are fading too. Not as much as the oldest ones, but noticeably. In the 3 months I've been here, her tall, thin silhouette has become less distinct, her rotes less crisp. She's being forgotten, her patterns losing their power as new patterns. My patterns begin to overlap and obscure them. Part of me feels guilty about this. She lived here for 30 years, and in less than a year of my residence, her presence will be effectively erased. But another part of me wonders if that's not actually a kindness. To be trapped in routine even after death, to continue walking the same paths forever. Perhaps fading away is a kind of release. I've started talking to her shadow sometimes, in the darkness. I'm sorry. I tell the tall, thin silhouette as it paces from the bedroom to the window. I'm sorry you were so lonely. I'm sorry you got stuck here. The shadow never responds, of course. It just continues its route, back and forth, wearing grooves that grow shallower with each passing week. But sometimes I imagine I can feel something in its movements. Not gratitude exactly, but perhaps a kind of weary acknowledgement. As if some part of Aunt Margaret, some fragment of consciousness caught in the pattern, understands what's happening and doesn't mind. I found her journals last week, tucked in a box at the back of the bedroom closet. 30 years of daily entries, all written in the same neat handwriting, all following the same format. The date, the weather, a brief description of her day. And as I read through them, I've only made it through 5 years so far. I began to see the pattern forming. In the early years, there was variety, visits from family, trips to the market, changes in routine. But gradually, year by year, the entries became more similar. The same phrases repeated. The same activities described in the same way. She walked to the window to check the weather. She made her coffee. She sat at the table. She paced the living room in the evening because she couldn't sleep. By the final years, entire weeks were almost identical. She'd reduced her life to such a narrow set of activities that there was nothing new to write about. She was becoming a shadow long before she died, I realized. The darkness just made it visible. The last entry was dated 3 days before her death. It read, "Another day the same as all the others. I can't remember when things stopped changing. I can't remember when I stopped changing. Sometimes I feel like I'm not really here anymore, just going through the motions, waiting for something that will never come. The apartment knows me better than I know myself now. It could probably perform my life without me." I closed the journal and sat in the dark, not because the power was out, but because I'd chosen to turn off the lights. And I watched my own shadow on the wall, cast by the streetlight through the window. It sat motionless, waiting for me to move, to give it purpose and direction. "We're leaving," I told it. "We're not staying here long enough to be recorded. We're not becoming a pattern." The shadow didn't respond, of course. But in the morning, I started packing. It's been a week since I made that decision, and I'm almost ready to go. Most of my belongings are in boxes. I've scheduled movers for next Friday. I've signed a lease on a new place across town, a modern apartment in a new building, all glass and steel, no history, no accumulated shadows, no grooves worn by previous tenants. But I'm not leaving everything behind. I've decided to take Aunt Margaret's journals with me. All 30 years of them. They're heavy. Dozens of notebooks packed into 3 boxes. But I feel like I owe it to her to carry them forward. To not let her fade completely from memory, even as her shadows dissipate. And last night, I did something I've been planning since that first power outage. I waited until midnight, then deliberately tripped the circuit breaker, plunging the apartment into darkness. I stood in the living room, and watched the shadows emerge, all the accumulated patterns of habit and routine playing out in the blackness. Aunt Margaret's shadow was there, fainter than ever, almost transparent. She moved from the bedroom to the window, paused, returned. Over and over, that same lonely circuit, and I walked with her. I matched my movements to hers, followed her path exactly, let myself fall into her pattern one last time. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to honor her. Maybe to understand her. Maybe to prove to myself that I could choose to follow the pattern, and then choose to break it. That I had control over my own routines, even when the apartment tried to dictate them. We walked together, the living woman and the shadow of the dead one, moving in sync through the darkness. And for those few minutes, I felt what she must have felt. The comfort of routine, the safety of predictability, the way habit can be a kind of armor against an uncertain world. I understood why she'd let herself become a pattern, why she'd narrowed her life down to these simple circuits. It was easier than facing the chaos outside, easier than risking change. But I also felt the trap closing, felt the apartment learning my movements, preparing to record them, to make them permanent. My own shadow began to move more smoothly, more confidently, as if it were thinking, yes, this is the pattern. This is what we'll do forever. This is who we are. And so I stopped. Right in the middle of the road, I stopped walking. I broke the pattern deliberately, consciously, with full awareness of what I was doing. Aunt Margaret's shadow continued without me, completing her circuit alone, fading back into the darkness. But I stood still, refusing to finish, refusing to let the apartment close the loop and lock me in. When I finally turned the lights back on, I saw my shadow on the wall. It was perfectly normal, perfectly synchronized with my movements. The anticipation was gone. The smooth, gliding quality had vanished. It was just a shadow again, following me instead of leading. I had won. I had lived in the apartment for 3 months without being consumed by it, without leaving enough of myself behind to haunt future tenants. When I move out next week, only the faintest traces of my presence will remain. Shadows so pale they'll be invisible even in the darkness, patterns too varied and inconsistent to replay. But tonight, my last night in the apartment before the movers come, I'll turn off the lights one more time. I'll stand in the darkness and say goodbye to all the shadows. Aunt Margaret's fading silhouette, the older, dimmer patterns I never learned the names of, even my own brief ghosts just beginning to form. I'll acknowledge what this place tried to teach me, that we're all creating patterns, wearing grooves into reality, leaving shadows that may outlast our physical presence. The question isn't whether we'll leave shadows. We all do. The question is whether we'll let those shadows define us, trap us, turn us into endless replays of ourselves. Or whether we'll keep moving, keep changing, keep refusing to become so predictable that the darkness can learn our shape and keep us forever. I choose the latter. I choose to remain undefined, unshadowed free. But I'll never forget what I saw in the darkness. I'll never forget that we're all being recorded somehow, by something. The places we inhabit, the routines we follow, the patterns we create. And if we're not careful, if we let ourselves fall too deeply into habit, those recordings become more real than we are. We become our own ghosts long before we die. So I'll keep moving, keep changing, keep varying my routines enough that no shadow can fully form. Not because I'm afraid of leaving traces. We all leave traces, but because I want those traces to tell a story of change and growth and unpredictability. Not an endless loop of the same day, the same movements, the same life repeated until it becomes meaningless. The apartment will survive my leaving. Other tenants will come. bringing their own patterns, adding their own shadows to the collection. And someday, maybe, the building will be torn down, and all those accumulated routines, all those recorded lives, will be erased completely. Or maybe they'll persist somehow, shadows looking for new walls to haunt, patterns searching for new places to replay. But that's not my concern anymore. My concern is my own shadow, my own patterns, my own life. And I'm taking them with me when I go. All of them, every movement, every habit, every trace of my presence. This apartment won't keep any piece of me. Except maybe this, the knowledge that someone lived here, briefly, who refused to be trapped, who saw the shadows in the darkness and chose not to join them, who understood what the apartment offered, safety, routine, the comfort of predictability, and said no. That's the only shadow I'm willing to leave behind. Not a pattern of movements or a recording of habits, but a choice. A demonstration that it's possible to live in a place without being consumed by it, to form routines without being trapped by them, to pass through life leaving barely a trace. Tomorrow, I move out. Tomorrow, I take my shadow to a new place, a place without history, without accumulated patterns, without darkness deep enough to make shadows visible. I'll be careful there too. I'll watch for the trap, vary my movements, refuse to let routine replace consciousness. Because I've learned what Aunt Margaret never learned. What she couldn't learn until it was too late, we're all becoming shadows. Every day, with every repeated action, we're carving ourselves into the world around us, creating patterns that may outlast our bodies. The question is whether we'll carve shallow, varied, unpredictable patterns that fade quickly and leave room for what comes next, or deep, repetitive grooves that trap us forever. I choose shallow. I choose varied. I choose unpredictable. I choose to remain visible even when the lights go out. The power is stable tonight. The lights burn steadily, casting normal shadows in normal directions. My shadow on the wall follows my movements exactly, with no anticipation, no independence, no disturbing fluidity. It's just a shadow again, my shadow completely under my control. But I know the truth now. In the darkness, given enough time and repetition, every shadow wants to become independent. Every pattern wants to become permanent. Every routine wants to become a prison. And the only way to stay free is to keep moving, keep changing, keep refusing to let the darkness learn your shape. So that's what I'll do. Tomorrow I'll move to a new place. Next week, I'll establish new routines. Next month, I'll break those routines and create different ones. I'll keep moving, keep changing, keep casting different shadows in different directions, never staying still long enough for any pattern to fully form. Because I've seen what happens when you stop moving. I've seen the shadows in the darkness, performing their eternal routines, trapped in patterns they can never break. And I've decided that's not how my story will end. My shadow will fade when I die, quickly and completely, leaving nothing behind, but the memory of someone who passed through life without being consumed by it. Someone who refused to haunt the places she lived. Someone who understood that the only way to truly exist is to remain impossible to record, too varied to replay, too alive to ever become a shadow. That's my promise to myself. Here in this apartment full of ghosts on my last night before I leave. I will not be recorded. I will not be replayed. I will not become a shadow in someone else's darkness. I will remain myself unpredictable and free until the very end. And when the darkness finally comes for me, the final darkness, not just a power outage, I'll face it having lived a life too complex to be reduced to simple patterns, too varied to be captured in shadow, too vital to be anything but completely, absolutely irrevocably gone when it's over. No shadows, no recordings. No endless replays in darkened rooms. Just a life lived fully and then finished, leaving nothing behind but the memory of someone who refused to be trapped. That's enough. That's everything. The lights are still on. My shadow still follows me, perfectly synchronized, perfectly controlled. And tomorrow we leave together, taking everything with us, leaving nothing behind. This apartment will forget me quickly. My routines weren't deep enough to carve grooves. My patterns weren't consistent enough to be recorded. I passed through like a brief thought, here and then gone, barely making an impression. And that, I've finally learned, is exactly how it should be. The darkness may remember everyone who's ever lived here, but it won't remember me. I made sure of that. I refused to become a shadow. I chose to stay visible, stay human, stay free. And tomorrow, I'll carry that choice with me to wherever I go next. A reminder that we're all haunted by our own routines, all becoming shadows of ourselves, all carving patterns that might outlast us. Unless we choose differently. Unless we refuse. Unless we keep moving. The lights are on. The power is steady. My shadow falls exactly where it should, doing nothing but what I tell it to do. And tomorrow, we leave this place behind, both of us, together free. And with that, our time tonight comes to an end. To everyone who stayed until the very last moment, thank you, truly. Having you here, sharing these shadows, makes the darkness feel a little less empty. I'm grateful you chose to spend a piece of your night here with me. I hope these stories brought you that quiet shiver, the kind that makes you feel alive. There's something special about this, all of us, connected by the love of a good story whispered in the dark. I'll be back soon with more echoes from the void, more mysteries waiting to be told. Until then, rest well, sleep deeply, and if you hear footsteps that shouldn't be there, just remember, they're only stories. Oh, and before you drift off, if you enjoyed our time together, a like and a subscribe will make sure we meet again, somewhere in the dark. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.